playing for the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's go.
Oh, yeah. Welcome back. It's the FSS Plus podcast. It's the rankings episode of the show because our senior analyst, Joe Doyle, is here to talk about his rankings, top 30s by teams, top 100 that just dropped earlier this week. Head to futurestarseries.com and check out all of Joe's rankings, the top 100 and the team top 30s. If you go to the rankings drop-down menu from the homepage of the website, you will find links to all of that, all 30 teams, top 30, and the MLB top 100 prospects. That's futurestarseries.com. Joe, when rankings are published, whether you're ranking players, teams, your favorite donuts, it doesn't matter. No matter whose name is on them, there are always going to be disagreements. There are going to be questions. So I figured we would spend some time on an episode talking about why this guy over that guy. Why is this guy ranked here? Why is this guy projected here and not here? And we're putting it on tape. So we're not just putting your name on it. We're putting your voice on it, so to speak. So I want to start out here, Joe, with role. You use the term role when you wrote these up. It's at the top of each of the top 30s. It's at the top of the top 100, explaining you're using role specifically rather than future value or more particularly OFP. And I think that's an important distinction here. Why don't you talk about what that means to you and why, to be honest with you, might actually be causing some confusion with some folks who think, man, this guy throws 99 with a wicked curveball. How are you putting a 50 on him?
Yeah, I mean, I knew this was going to happen. Like, it's such an unconventional way to evaluate talent. Listen, role is put yourself in the seat of a front office executive. Like, if you're, or hell, put yourself in the seat of a Las Vegas gambler. I think both of those kind of fit.
I can do that one, Joe. I can do the second one. The first one I can't do, but the second one I can do.
Yeah. We're not going to be doing that. So this is how you value a player. Like, what is the most likely outcome? What is the most likely outcome? And so I knew people weren't going to read those first couple of paragraphs. What you're used to reading on the internet is future value, is OFP, is potential grade. Like, this is more so if you had to wager real money on this, or if you had to wager in a trade what this player was going to end up looking like, what are they going to look like? And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying this is not a ceiling grade. It's what is the most likely outcome.
Right. It's not what his potential is. So if you put a 50 on a guy, that doesn't mean he can't be better. It means that there's also a chance he's a 45. There are things that can get in the way. And while injury is always a part of this, I imagine, Joe, pre-existing injuries, if there are a bunch of nagging ones or a very specific serious one, that comes into play when you're putting your role out there. When you're putting a 50 on a guy or 45 on a guy or 55 on a guy, those things come into play as well.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, risk is a big part of role. Like, if there's a guy that has chronic back problems or, is dealing with a second Tommy John or has speed bumps that other guys just don't have, red flags that could mitigate the upside of one player. Yeah, I mean, generally, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative with the grade. I was generally, I mean, there were a couple guys on my top 100 board that I felt I was a little bit more aggressive with than the rest of the industry, but generally, I'm risk averse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of the opposite. I wouldn't say I'm super risk, but I'm kind of the opposite. I lean toward the riskier because I'm looking for that star. I think of a prospect ranking is like a draft, like one big draft, essentially. And when people say, hey, why did you pick, Celestin over, Johnny Farmello or something in the Mariners system? I say, I believe in the upside a little more with Celestin. He's a shortstop, switch hitter, and it's always about the ceiling and the upside, even if the risk is the same. So
Yep.
I think we think about it the right way. It's just, how do you want to approach this? But I think taking the from the angle of, hey, what would you trade for first? Like, I think positional value comes into play here too, maybe more than people realize. And I want to start with Bryce Eldridge. You had Bryce Eldridge 45 on your top 100, but we learned this week after your rankings went final and went live, the Giants are going to have Eldridge, Joe, focus on first base only. So not only is the two-way prep star not going to pitch, he's not going to play the outfield, and he's going to focus on first base. How much would that have impacted your ranking had we known this info a week ago? You had him 45. Give me a range.
Yeah, I mean, this might. I don't know if I haven't thought this far ahead. This might have moved him down into a roll 50 type of a
Mhm.
guy because the the production and the risk that goes into the bat alone as a first baseman. There's so much more risk that goes into just being a first baseman. You're competing against guys that are hitting 40 homers a year to go to an all-star game. And I think the frustrating thing for me, at least, with that development is in high school, we were seeing Bryce Eldridge get above average run times and
Mhm.
plus throwing grades in right field. And, he played center field for his high school team until he sprained his ankle. So I'm not a little surprised. I'm frankly stunned that the Giants would pull the plug on him playing the outfield this early, considering the physical
Mhm.
tools. And I think once you start talking about a guy, he would have fallen from at least 45 to 60. I would have put him behind Sebastian Wolcott and Enrique
Mhm.
Bradfield Jr. And if he falls into the roll 50 category, then he probably ends up somewhere in the 65 to 68 range in that Brady House Xavier Isaac mold.
Yeah, when you think about a guy like that, you mentioned Enrique Bradfield Jr. We're going to get to him in a bit too. When you think about a guy like Eldridge, like, I don't know, I didn't put together a top 100. That's your job, Joe. But I could see a guy like that falling completely off my 100
Yeah.
because we're talking about a first baseman. We're not talking about a guy who's going to play third base for the first 4 or 5 years of his career and then probably move across where you're getting that value. He's not going to play right field for 4 or 5. They're literally moving him to first base as if that's just where he's going to play. And this would be different. I think back to Bryce Harper when he was the number 1 pick overall as a 9-year-old, it seemed, in 2010, and got to the big leagues, 17 seconds later. Like, he was a catcher in high school.
Hmm.
But if you went to see him at College of Southern Nevada, you saw him catch one day, play third base the next, play center field the next, and he looked good at all three. It was ridiculous. You completely understand why the Nationals moved him immediately to the outfield. One, they knew he could handle that position, but two, they also knew the bat was going to move really fast. That's
Yeah.
not the case with Eldridge, right? That's not a fast moving prep bat that gets to the big leagues inside of 2 years, right? That's not the situation.
It could be. I mean, it is a really advanced bat, but it's a 6'7" long levers, long swing. Like, there's
Mhm.
certainly some intrinsic risk that comes with a player that big. I mean, look at Spencer Jones. His
Mhm.
acclimation to professional baseball has taken some time. Now, it seems to have clicked a bit over the last calendar year, but I don't think anyone is still sold that Spencer Jones is a dynamic big leaguer. I mean,
Mhm.
to put some context into what you're saying, I have 3 first basemen on my top 100 board, just 3, and 2 of them are exquisite hitters in Nolan
Mhm.
Shanuel and Kyle Manzardo. Xavier Isaac is the first baseman on my board at 67. So, you know, the more I talk through this, the more I think Eldridge is probably in that 68 to 72 range. I don't think he's a better first base prospect than Xavier Isaac right now. Do you?
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. Not at this point. I mean, you get him out there and you see what happens in a year, and you get an idea that the bats may be a little more advanced than you thought. I mean, the bats advanced. That's why he was taken so high. Like, the
Yeah.
bats advance. That's all we know at this point. Now it's going to be about, what do we learn about how he handles pro pitching? How quickly can he move up? Can he get the full season ball and perform, put up a big year? Then maybe you rethink about what the ceiling is and what the risk, what kind of risk is left there. You mentioned Enrique Bradfield in passing there a second ago. You have him at 59. That's, as far as I can tell, that's as high as anybody has him ranked. That's higher than anybody has him ranked. What got Bradfield to 59 for you?
I don't know. I don't know if anybody else has him on their board, but I think he's being slept on a little bit, and I think that might just be because the industry as a whole, um, really almost like fetishes exit velos, which I understand. Like it's that's how you develop impact, middle of the order impact. But
Mhm.
I look at Bradfield as a guy that is probably going to accidentally run into a 265, 270 average. He's going to play a double plus center field. He's going to steal 60 bases if you give him the plate appearances to do so. That's a 3.5 win player in Camden Yards. It's a you know he could move pretty quickly too with Cedric Mullins' contract situation as well. Like, I just think he is. If you had to put a definition of a roll 50 guy, it is a starter on a championship team with the outside shot of going to a couple of All-Star games, and that, to me at least,
Yeah.
is Enrique Bradfield in a bottle.
Yeah. If you're talking about plus to plus plus defense in center and double plus run, and he's going to hit 270, I guess as long as that's not an empty 270, I'm right there with you. And that is probably a top 50 to 80 guy, in the top 100 at this place.
But what
Yeah,
is
it's
empty? I mean, that
empty
would be
just
my
meaning
question.
he doesn't walk. He's a hacker. He hits 270 with no OBP. That's just what I mean by empty. Power, to me, I wouldn't say when a guy doesn't hit for a lot of power, I wouldn't call that empty because some guys just aren't power hitters. Luis
Yeah,
Ariz doesn't hit for power, but it's not an empty batting average because he does walk enough, right?
yeah,
If you got a plus 40 or better, I wouldn't call it empty. And I'm not saying Bradfield's going to be that. I'm saying as long as that's not what we're talking about, that's enough offense. That's getting on base enough to use his speed to kind of avoid being a weak spot in a lineup and then just let his defense go to work. Like, yeah, that's a pretty good player. Do you look at Bradfield as a guy who comes to pro ball with a little less risk? I mean, you're not putting a super high ceiling on him. So does that kind of inherently tell you there's a little less risk of him actually getting there? Because defense and speed aren't really going to slump. He's going to be able to impact the game in those two ways.
yeah. I think it's a high floor. It might not be a high ceiling, but like look at it like this, Jason. If you go back 13 or 14 years, D. Gordon was pretty much a unanimous top 50 prospect back
Mm-hmm.
to back years. And he was the number one prospect in the Dodgers system for like 3 years. He was not a good defender at shortstop. He played shortstop for I think like a year and a half before they started moving him around a little bit to second base. And he eventually got some time in center field. But how much different is this profile? Right? Like
Yeah,
CJ
not
Abrams too. He was a top
yeah,
15
not
guy,
yeah,
but
not very. When you look at D Gordon's best years, he was hitting somewhere between 280 and 330. And
mhm.
he hit it well over 300 a couple of times. I think he hit 330 plus once. Maybe his first year in Miami. Um, it didn't walk a lot, but if you're going to hit 290, you're going to have above league average OBPs as well. So while some of his years were relatively empty batting average, a lot of them weren't. 308 with a 340 OBP, I will take that. 330 with a 360 OBP, I will take that. 290 with a 326 OBP, I will take that when you're putting up above average defense at a premium spot. And Strange did move to second and look pretty darn good over there for
Yeah.
several years. So
And
that's a
Strange didn't look good at shortstop. So I mean, this is
right.
almost like a tip of the cap to Bradfield.
Yeah,
I just think
absolutely.
people are maybe sleeping on that profile a little bit just because the batted ball data isn't as gaudy as, a lot of the other guys on this board.
Yeah, this allows me to bring up the batted ball data with high school kids, Joe, is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. You got a kid here in Bradfield who's what, 6'1" and 170.
Yeah.
Um, Now, D Strange didn't get that much stronger, but it's something pushed in baseball these days. You need to add not necessarily just weight, but strength, like legitimate strength. He's got a frame where he's going to be able to add 10, 15 pounds at least before he gets to the big leagues. We're talking about a 6'1", maybe he grows a tad, but 6'1", 6'2", 180 to 190-pound player. His batted ball data has to be judged on a curve. I understand that you get the Brady Houses and the Bryce Eldridges and guys like that, and it's like, man, they're already, quote unquote, already putting up huge exit velos. Great, I get that. But it's hard to hold something like that against an Enrique Bradfield when power's not his game, for one. And he's this 17, 18-year-old kid who's 165 to 170 pounds when he's going to be 15, 20 pounds heavier when he gets to the big leagues. So as long as I think he's going to get to acceptable big league ranges, considering how solidly he strikes the baseball and how often he strikes the baseball, I'm looking at that batted ball data and just shrugging. I'm shrugging. That doesn't mean really all that much to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, what do you want out of, like, if Bradfield gave you 9 to 12 homers a year, you'd be stoked. You'd be stoked. You know, like
Yeah,
if he's Rajai Davis, you're, a Coco Crisp, or any of those speedy, fast, elite outfielders from back in the day, you're stoked.
Coco Crisp is a good one. He was a lot better player than people give him credit for. I was literally just
Mhm.
looking at his profile the other day, and I was like, man, he was actually really, really good. When you look at Luis Ariz, and I'm not suggesting that's the comp, Bradfield can run, and Ariz, pretty much a fringy to average runner pretty much his whole career, even though he's been mostly a second baseman. You get the high average, doesn't walk a lot. Has had a couple of years where he's walked 8-9%. He only walked 6% of the time a year ago. He's just a guy that swings a lot and makes a lot of contact. But you look at a guy like that and you think about how often he's on base. We think about one of the things we talk about a lot is RBI, Joe, is very dependent on your teammates. Runs scored is very dependent on your teammates. But we don't think about this in the other direction, because sometimes the Kyle Schwarbers of the world, the Chris Bryants of the world, bat leadoff or second and score 120 runs. And it's like, oh, look, he's getting on base all this time. But when you get a guy like Bradford on base, and he's going to be able to score runs from first that others aren't. He's going to be able to score runs from second that others aren't. He's going to be able to score and sacrifice flies that others aren't. And that's different than Luis Ariz. Like, Bradfield has an element to his game that even Ariz doesn't have. I like the crisp in the D Gordon one, D Strange Gordon. Gordon, is it Strange Gordon or Gordon's? It's Strange Gordon.
Yeah, Strange Gordon.
D Strange. It's a great name, by the way.
Doctor Strange.
So Bradfield interesting at 59, but another one is Felnine Celestin, the Mariners shortstop, at 96. Now Celestin hasn't played. I think he's 18 years old and he hasn't played. But you know what? Neither is Enrique Bradfield Jr. Neither is Bryce Elder. They haven't played pro ball. And gosh forbid, Joe, someone plays 11 games last summer, and all of a sudden, at least he has pro experience comes into the conversation is just a joke. Celestin at 96. Tell me how he got there.
Well, let me just look at this from like a conventional wisdom. Leo Dallas DeVries is also on my board. He's an absolute tool shed. And I think I got him like 94. Yeah, 94 with the Padres. I'm so high on DeVries that I think he's a roll 50. I think he is a big league regular. Like, if I'm betting, he's a big league regular on a good team. So he gets 4.2 million in a lesser international class. Felnine Celestin gets 4.7 million in a more loaded top heavy class in 2022. And he's almost being penalized for having a hamstring injury. But he plays in 5 exhibition games. He goes like 5 for 13 or something crazy with a home run, 2 doubles. He looks every bit the part of an elite shortstop. I just look at it as, and especially with where I have Ethan Salas. Like, I have Ethan Salas, the number 10 player in this entire class, the entire country, number 10. Celestin was right there with Salas in terms of signing bonus. So I just think some of the luster that is being taken away from Celestin's profile is a little unwarranted, and I think he's every bit the high-level prospect that DeVries is. So, I guess maybe I just want to be ahead of the curve on this one. Yeah,
switch hitter for sure, shortstop, has some power potential. He's a fun, interesting prospect in Seattle, and you had a chance to talk to Mariners GM Jerry DePoto the other day on the Overslap podcast, Joe Doyle's Overslap podcast. You can find that at Patreon. And you were able to ask about Celestin, and he had a really interesting answer. Joe, I'll let you tell it, but it was, if you're a Mariners fan, you got to be thinking, all right, like, this is telling to me, not just, hey, here's some information. This tells me about the player, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, for a guy that essentially didn't play in the Dominican Summer League, Seattle's big on making sure a guy gets an entire season, a short season of DSL under their belt. He's in minor league spring training, and if he proves he's ready to go to Modesto and play at low A at the age of 18, they're just going to throw him in. They're just going to let him do pro ball. And Jerry mentioned that he's put on a ton of good weight. He's fully healthy from the hamstring injury, and he's every bit the athlete that he was when he signed. Yeah, I mean, listen, if the kid ends up in Modesto on May 1st, there's a shot he sees. There's at least a shot he sees Everett as an 18 or a 19-year-old, and I think at that point you're talking about a top 50 or 60 prospect if things are going the way that they expect.
Yeah, that Seattle system getting really, really interesting. The Modesto, the low A, full season low A, absolutely loaded to end the year, and most of those guys are going to head back there, and Celestin could join them. So that's absolutely crazy.
Nutty, yeah.
In the Colorado system, Joe, how close for you is Chase Dollander, their top draft pick, from overtaking Ade Alamador for the number one spot in that system for the Rockies?
I mean, they're a half grade apart. I have Dollander as a roll 55, 35th, or not the 35th prospect, in the 41st prospect in minor league baseball. I've got Amador in the 20s at number 19 overall as a roll 60. I think as a position player, Ade Amador has a chance to do everything in the game. He'll run, he'll defend, he'll hit for average, he'll hit for a ton of average. And I think with his frame, I remember writing up Ade Amador in 2021 when he was an international free agent, and he was like 6'4", 155 pounds. And I was like, good God, this guy, the bat is swinging him. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Now he's put on a little bit of weight, a little bit of strength, and he looks like a 5-tool player. It wouldn't surprise me if he sees the big leagues this year, and I could see him being a guy that goes to 2, 3, 4 All-Star games, just posting really crazy numbers. The thing with Dollander is he just lost the breaking ball at times last year. Like the slider that was so unbelievable. What is that? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we know why though, don't we? At least we partially know why. When you fiddle with the grip on your pitch, I mean, that's risky, and that's what happened, right? And then it just didn't work trying to go back to it yet.
Yep, grip. He was a little beat up last year. He had some things off the field that I think were kind of getting in the way. And also, you come in being labeled, and I'll take full responsibility for saying this, as like the next Justin Verlander, the next Steven Strasburg. I wrote that article. And then Paul Skeens just jumps right in front of you and takes the superlatives off of your plate. That's a lot for one guy to handle. Another thing that has to be brought up here, Jason, is he's in Colorado. With all due respect to the Rockies, how often do the Rockies develop a pitcher that goes to 5 All-Star games, like a roll 60, 5 or 6 All-Star games? Like, it's just so tough at Coors that I would be lying if I said that didn't affect his grade at all.
And the affiliates aren't all in great spots either.
No, you think he's going to have success in Albuquerque?
Yeah.
No.
Like, I went to Albuquerque once and had no success, Joe. So I'll back up your statement. I had no success in Albuquerque. I have no footprint there. They hate me there. It's terrible. It was a bad experience.
Really quickly, where do you land on that? Because I mean, do position players just get a leg up in terms of development in your eyes in Colorado?
I don't know. It's
not
tough.
fair.
For me, it's tough because I don't know what Dollander brings to the table that might take some pressure off the being a college guy. For one, the velocity is already there. Yeah, there's some things to fix. Yes, but his sophomore year at Tennessee, the slider was absurd and ridiculous. So maybe there's not a whole lot to do there. Really, maybe it's just have a camp, come in, get back to throwing the slider the way you used to throw the slider, and the slider's back, and all of a sudden we're talking about a guy who moves up a half a grade, right?
Yeah.
I get that some of that's possible. You're right, though. It's difficult for them to develop pitching, but I also look at that organization and think they get guys with good stuff that go there, that good stuff that we've seen succeed in other places, and they go to Colorado and they don't. We've seen that where they change teams in the minors. We've seen where they change teams in the big league level. It's just, it's impossible. In terms of development, I don't know. I guess I'm separating development and ability here. Like you can
Sure.
develop skill and you can turn tools into skill, and then the production on the field doesn't look right because of where you're pitching. Again,
You're a
Albuquerque.
prisoner. You're a prisoner of your circumstances.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
that's rather
And
unfortunate.
another thing to keep in mind with Dolander is like, okay, so 2022 it was electric, that
Mhm,
slider. 2023 it backed up. It lost a bit of sweep. It lost a bit of depth. He comes into pro ball, totally different ball, a little bit lower stitches, and
mhm.
he has to deal with thinner air, which generally takes a little bit of action off of the baseball. Like it's I mean he's just been backed into a little bit of a corner that he can't control, and for the sake of this exercise, we just need to see it before we can
Mhm.
trust it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Amador number one there. Totally get it. Absolutely. What about in Washington, where, not necessarily just from an organizational standpoint, but Dylan Cruz, one of the top picks in the draft. Obviously, everybody knows about Dylan Cruz, but James Wood is there in Washington out of the Juan Soto deal. How close are the two of those? I'm not suggesting Wood should be over Cruz or that I would put Wood over Cruz, but you can argue upside advantage to Wood pretty easily. How close are those two in grade for you, and what might Wood have to do to overtake Cruz to be the number one prospect in that system?
Let me throw this back at you. How similar is this to 2022 with Jared Kelnick and Julio Rodriguez? We're talking We're talking floor polish in
Yeah,
Kelnick, like high floor,
right.
high
Mhm,
polish, has never struggled,
mhm,
and the behemoth that is
mhm.
Julio Rodriguez, the massive power, the huge bat speed. Like I almost see some similarities between those two like duos. For me, it listen, I had Jared Kelnick a better prospect than Julio
So
because
did
I
I.
thought the
Yeah.
volatility in Julio's profile
Mhm.
scared me a little bit. I'm a bit more conservative. Both of these guys are roll 60s, roll sixes. I think they're both going to go to multiple All Star games. Dylan Cruz has a higher floor. Um,
Mhm.
I think he's going to surely hit, and he's at least got a chance to play up the middle of the field. Whereas James Wood, if it goes right, like it's 270 and 40 home runs. And I don't see
Mhm.
that with Dylan
Yeah.
Cruz. So,
A lot of swing and miss still with Wood. He went to Double A last year, in an 87 games, 323 at bats at 124 strikeouts. That's obviously a big thing. But one thing on his side, um, he was 20 last year, and he's
yeah.
just 21 this year. So that upside's still there. The big power, obviously, he's still a pretty good athlete, but is a corner guy. Yeah, for me, I think Cruz would probably have to show some struggles on something for Wood to be able to catch him. I'm not sure Wood can catch him there, even though the upside there is very, very similar, maybe even in favor of Wood. But Washington certainly have some outfielders. So you mentioned CJ Abrams a little bit earlier. I'm a huge fan of CJ Abrams. I see the pop developing at the big league level. Second base seems to fit him, a lot better, and he's able to relax. It's really interesting to see Washington maybe start to try to climb out of the cellar a little bit, to try to climb out of the rebuild a little bit with new ownership and all that good stuff, and having traded away their World Series guys. But Wood and Cruz, obviously, a huge part of that as well. In Boston, Marcelo Mayer, the shortstop, he's had some issues, obviously. Roman Anthony, in many other places, Roman Anthony, the rest of the industry prefers Roman Anthony at this point. You still have Mayer over Anthony. How close are those two for you, just from an organizational standpoint? If you're the Boston Red Sox and you're thinking about it within that organization, how close are those two?
I mean, a lot of this boils down to the fact that Marcelo Mayer is going to play shortstop. I think a
Mm,
lot of his value is still derived from the fact that he plays shortstop. It's kind of the Colson Montgomery thing. Like we're still waiting for Mayer to show in-game power, and
mm,
like the raw power is clearly there, and he hits the ball in the air. It's pull side juice. Um, but yeah, when he got drafted, I remember I was like, I think this is Xander Bogarts. Like this really feels like Xander Bogarts. And I still feel that way to this day. Like I think this is a guy that roll 60 says it all. Like
mm.
probably goes to a handful of all-star games as a pure hitter with a couple of seasons where the power really jumps, and he's never going to blow your socks off at shortstop, but he'll do everything a routine shortstop is asked to do. Whereas Roman Anthony's almost certainly going to end up in a corner. It's a profile that's buoyed by strength and power and discipline, and he uses the entire field. So if you gave me the Roman Anthony profile in center field, it's probably a top 10 prospect in the game or top 15 prospect in the
Right.
game.
Right.
But as a corner outfielder, I mean, you're automatically dinged a little bit by just the value of the position.
And it might have to be left field too. It's not a great
Yeah.
arm. Like it's pretty fringe average in Roman Anthony. I think this would be easier for me to think about if Mayer hadn't had the injury issues.
I agree. Yeah.
Only played like 75 to 80 games a year ago, struggled in AA in about 40, 45 games, almost 200 plate appearances. That certainly doesn't help. But when you look at the overall profile, if he can hit 250, 260 with 20 plus homers and play shortstop, that's pretty huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I think
huge.
he's a better hitter than that. Like, I do think Mayer's a 275 guy, but to your point, I don't think he's going to be a guy that goes much higher than 25 homers most of his years. And that is the Xander Bogaerts,
Yeah.
blue
It absolutely is.
profile. Yeah.
And the one thing we should throw out there too is Mayer just turned 21 in December. He played all of last year at 20 years old and got to AA. He did perform in high A. 2 years in a row he performed in high A. Small samples, but he performed there over about 60 games total over the course of 2 seasons. And then he went to AA and struggled in a lot of ways. But, some way, the batting average didn't look good. But he did hit 6 homers. But 20 years old, doing that at 20, getting to AA, that does say
Left-handed.
something about him.
Yeah.
And they've kept him at shortstop. I think that's the big thing, that they haven't freaked out about these injuries and said, hey, let's make this easier for you. Let's move you to third. Let's move you to second. Let's move you to left or something. They've stuck with him there. And I think his age has a lot to do with that. Really interesting. Boston's got some, Boston's improved. We're going to talk about Boston in the next episode. I think we're going to get,
it's almost like Chaim Bloom did his job, Jason.
Yeah. It's almost like he did. It's pretty incredible. Yeah. It's really too bad. It's really too bad that he did his job, because I'm not sure that that organization above the front office really deserves it. One more here for me. Jackson Jobe. We've seen some of the folks, the Detroit fan base, it appears, didn't really love
mad.
that Jackson Jobe got a 55 role for me. That's an above average player. And there were some questions as to why he would get a 55 when you look at the raw stuff, and it's, chance at a plus breaking ball, big time velocity. He's a great athlete. Like, how in the world does he get a 55 when everything screams 60, 65? Explain that a little bit. You did that a little bit when we talked about role, but talk about Jobe in that form.
Yeah, I think when we were prefacing this episode, the injury thing, like, there is a lot of red flags in what Jackson Jobe has been. The 2.5 months, the second half of 2023 was an absolute showcase. He was the best minor league pitcher in minor league baseball. I don't disagree with that. But for me to sit here today after a 2.5 month showing and say this is an all-star, like, this is definitely an all-star, perennial all-star type of a player, a high number 2 on a championship team, I think that exists, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's what he ends up being. But he had a degenerative back issue that he missed almost 3 months with. He's got TJ in the rearview mirror that, we never know how guys are going to totally come back from that. Yes, it's gotten easier. Yes, the surgery has become, and the recovery and the physical therapy. Yeah, it's all come a long ways, but it's still in his rearview mirror. I just want to see Jackson Jobe do it through July, because if he can string together a full year, especially if he does what he did last year, he probably jumps up into a roll 60, and he probably jumps up into my top 15. I'd rather have Jackson Jobe than a guy like Andrew Painter, who's in the throes of things right now. So
Sure.
having missed so much of the last 2.5 seasons. I just want to see him do it a little bit more before I'm a general manager or I'm a high roller in Vegas going, he's an ace,
Mhm.
put the chips on the table.
Right.
That's all.
2021 first rounder, number 3 overall pick by Detroit, was at Heritage Hall High
Yeah.
School. He has 126 innings in pro ball under his belt, only 64 innings a year ago. So do we want to freak out about 64 innings and base his entire status and profile on 64 innings? Or do we want to acknowledge those 64? Because I'm with you here. Do we want to acknowledge those 64 innings, but also acknowledge all of those other things and acknowledge the fact that 64 innings is not a lot? It's not a
Yeah.
lot. He was dominant
I'll-
for 64 innings all the way up to double A, and he only made one start in double A, was good there too, but it is just high A,
Mhm.
So good prospect, very good prospect, chance to be a 1 or a 2, Joe.
Chance to be a roll 7. I mean, he can really he could end up a roll 7, a borderline elite starting pitcher in this league who goes to, 4 All-Star games every 5 years and gets Cy Young votes. Do I want to stake my reputation on that today? No, I want to see him the first half of this season.
Mm. Were there, looking at your top 100, were there things that surprised you when you got done putting it all together and you kind of looked at it and you're like, huh, I'm kind of surprised this guy landed there, or I'm kind of surprised this team didn't have more, or this team ended up with 5, or this team ended up with 3? Are there anything that surprised you at the end of it? Because you're not really sitting there saying, all right, Baltimore's got to have this many, and I got to have this guy in the top. No, you're literally just going through your evaluations of players and ordering them, almost not really looking at the name or the team to some extent,
Yeah.
and then ordering them. And then all of a sudden here you got an order and you look at your 80s and it's Braden Taylor and Jordan Beck and Connor Phillips and Drew Thorpe and Kyle Manzardo. And you wouldn't necessarily have thought it would have been that order when you started the process. What surprised you about your own top 100 once you got done?
I think less so in the top 100. So a little look behind the curtain. I had 149 players who earned a roll 50 or higher. So that's roughly 5 a team. If my math is right, that doesn't sound right, but you've roughly 5 a team. So, I mean, you could say 48 guys or 49 guys, 48 guys just missed. There's 48 guys here who could have been on the board. I think for me, doing my boards as a whole, the thing that really surprised me, and this is just how my grading system, at least this year, works, is the relievers. I've got relievers sprinkled in all over the place. And because of that, if you go and look at top 30 boards, especially in that 45 roll range, you're going to see guys that are generally 5 or 6 spots higher than you'll see in every other public board. The one guy that I did want to point out that didn't make this, and frankly, he just missed, was DL Hall for the Brewers. As a starting pitcher, he's a roll 50, and that's why he just missed this board. But as a reliever, if they would have kept him as a reliever, I really believe in him being an impact reliever at the next level. He would have been in my top 70 as a reliever. So that's just kind of an example of guys skewing up and down based on their position.
That tells me, Joe, you think he's a Josh Hader like impact on the game as a reliever.
Yeah,
like
I mean,
one
I'd
of the
say
top
Josh
10
Hader
relievers in baseball.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Josh Hader is probably a 6 or a 7. I mean, he's the best closer in baseball, a perennial all-star. He's a real difference maker. But as a roll 55, I would see DL Hall as an all-star, a potential all-star reliever, impact, 9th inning, above average closer type of thing. So that's where you're going to see the biggest differences in my board compared to, I mean, shoot, we had pushback on this. Jarlene Susana with the Washington Nationals. He just missed my top 100 despite getting shelled and walking a bunch of people this year. I still believe he is a dynamic 8th inning or 9th inning guy who had a bad year. He was 128 on my board as a roll 50. So it's just a different process.
He's only a second grader. He's just a kid. So that obviously matters here as well, guy. How much time do they really have left before you expect them to give you value? at the big league level, and how patient is the team willing to actually be with a player like that. Sometimes it's really obvious. Sometimes it's not. So generally what happens, and I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit as we wrap this up. Over the summer, during the season and over the summer, certainly, farm systems change. Guys perform, guys don't perform, guys get hurt, guys come back from injury. The draft in July infuses more talent into these organizations, and the trade deadline, talents change teams. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm painting you into a corner and saying, you plan to do top 30 updates after the trade deadline. So do we get an early August top 100 and team top 30 updates from you?
One of my favorite things to do all year is, I'm not just saying this, honestly, is to figure out where draft picks deserve to be in a top 30. And so you'll definitely get new top 30s for me after the draft, after the deadline, and those will probably come out the first week of August.
Awesome. Sounds great. Joe, always great talking baseball with you. People, this has been the FSS Plus podcast.
So just chill till the next episode.